So when we say inheritance, it is inheriting one class with another. Inheriting one class to other. What do you mean by that? And what is the necessity of doing that? Suppose I have a class C1 and this C1 class is having some data and functionality. Class means combination of data and functionality. So I have a class and that is having some data and functionality, and I have another class that is also having some data and functionality. And here I have some main. Suppose main means that main also inside a class only. So just drawing the skeletal structure. This is program class. This is also having some function called main, and inside main maybe some coding we have, just dot 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 I'm mentioning. So apart from main class, suppose I have two other classes. Okay, so main class always required, so I put it. Apart from that, I have some two or more classes. In this hierarchy, now currently no class is having any relation with any other. Then what we do to call this data and functionality, we create this class object here. Suppose I said C1 object number 1 equal to new C1. Meaning is, please allocate memory for class number 1, and if necessary you call the functions, because you have already allocated the memory to class number 1 elements in this line. Absolutely fine. Similarly, in order to call this functionality and this data, you are creating some other object, just like C2, some object number 2 equal to new C2. So now two classes, two objects, because there is no relationship between class number 1 and class number 2. This level is under encapsulation. We know already. Grouping together data and member functions in various classes, and whenever required, creating the instance of those classes and then calling the respective functions, if any. So here, using obj1, we can call or we can use, I will say, data and functionality of C1. Similarly, using second object obj2, we can use data and functionality of C2. Conditions apply, obviously, if they are not private. Okay, private is private. Private means nobody can call it outside the class, even if you are creating object. So I assume that we are talking about public this time, public data and functionality. Suppose still we need object. Without object we cannot call them, even though they are public. So these things we know already. Now what additional we want to know is, imagine I have some data or functionality here in C1 which should be accessed by C2 object. That means while creating the object of C2, can I reuse some of data and some of the member functions of C1 when it is required? Suppose this is not C1, this is something called accountant, and this is not C2, this is called something called senior accountant. Think it this way. And your business logic says, your company instructs you as a developer, saying that not all the functionality of accountant, but some of the accountant functionality should be directly used by senior accountant, and few more functionality of accountant can be used indirectly with the help of object by senior accountant. That means overall idea is, if you are doing this way without any relationship between accountant and senior accountant, accountant functionality cannot be used by senior accountant, even senior accountant functionality cannot be used by accountant as of now, because both class object is altogether different. But now requirement is little bit different. Can some or all of the functionality, some or all, okay, not necessarily always all, some or all of the functionality of accountant be used by senior accountant? That is a question mark now. So writing right side just for your understanding. Can one or more functionality, I will say data or functionality of C1, okay, be used by C2 object? This is a question mark. That means if I will create the object of C2, can I use C2 functionality, C2 data, as well as one or more data and functionality of C1? Because my business requirement needs it. Okay. If this question to be answered, the feature what we have to use is inheritance. That means you have to inherit C2 as a child of C1, just like this. So how to decide who is parent, who is child? From the requirement. So my requirement is, can I use, can one or more data functionality of C1 be used by C2? That means indirectly saying, can I inherit the C1 feature to C2? Just like father to child. Okay. When we see a child, suddenly we say sometimes some of the features he has inherited from his father. Not necessarily all. Okay. It will never be like son will be exactly looking like father, but little similarity sometimes we say. That is what here also we are demanding. Can one or more functionality or data of C1 be used by C2 object? And answer is yes. But how? You have to inherit C1 to C2. So when I put colon C1 here, just have a look. After colon, what you give, that is called parent class. Before colon, what is there? That is called child class. So always parent feature is getting inherited to child. Nobody will say this father is looking like his child, but everybody will say that child is looking like the father. Same thing, C2 is getting one or more feature of C1, but nobody will say C1 is getting one or more feature of C2 here. So C1 become father, or we say it as parent class, and C2 is here child class. So let me write that as well as a note. So when we inherit C1 to C2 like above syntax, then C1 feature, when I say feature, in this case data or functionality, okay, feature of a class means what you understand? Data or functionality. So then C1 feature will be inherited to C2, not vice versa. It is not like bottom to top, it is top to bottom. C1 to C2. It doesn't mean that if I will keep it at bottom, it will not work. Yes, it will also work. But still we say it like a top to bottom approach. Okay. It will work wherever you keep top or bottom. So who is getting inherited? He is parent. Whom to get inherited? That is child. So here C1 is parent class and C2 is child class. So here C1 is parent class and C2 is child class. That means if I created now only one object instead of two objects, if I created only one object instead of two objects, just like this C2 object equal to new C2, then good to go. OBJ can call all these things. So here, just for your understanding, I will say in this case, OBJ can call or can use both C1 and C2 permissible data and functionality. Obviously, I will say permissible only. If somebody say private, forget about other class, own class function or data also cannot be used. That's why I said permissible data and functionality. So we are not at all talking about private this time. We are talking about public this time. That's why I here wrote directly public. Okay. So if I will create this object of C2, now all the public members of C1 and all the public members of C2, I can easily call, no doubt about it. Then we will go to protected later. First, let's see what is happening in the public area. Private, obviously no access. Public, parent as well as child, both access I will get with one object. Now you will ask me what is the benefit of that? What's harm if I will create two objects? Now today we are talking about two classes, guys. In real-time projects, sometimes it will be 50 classes, 100 classes, 200 classes, but in a hierarchy, like CEO of the company at the top of the hierarchy. Below that, let's say MD. Below that, let's say senior managers. Below that, let's say managers. Below that, deputy manager, assistant manager, like that some hierarchy is there. For every hierarchy, there will be some functionality, some data. Now, suppose tomorrow your organization is asking topmost level person whose designation is CEO, if he wants to see everything about what is happening in the organization, so will you create 100 objects and give it to CEO, saying that you use this object, that object, also everything, and you try to see what is happening in the organization? That is not a good idea. How many minimum objects you can create to do the same work? That is always a good developer's practice. Allocation of the memory will not be duplicated, first of all. Second thing is, switching from one object to another to execute one or more functionality will always take more time to execute. That's why always it is better if something we can do so that with less number of objects any requirement can be fulfilled. Like in basic area, we are thinking with less number of variables, can I do the same thing? Here we are thinking in object-oriented programming, with less number of objects, can I do the same thing? So now, whoever C1, whoever C2, we want to say, if C2 is coming, I will offer this object and he will enjoy. If C1 is coming, then he will use his own class variables and data member functions, everything. Reason, top to bottom, C1 has inherited to C2, not C2 has inherited to C1. If I will say MD and manager, suppose your business logic is saying MD should use manager's data and functionality, but manager should not use MD's data and functionality. Take this requirement and tell me who will be C1 here and who will be C2 here. MD and manager. Manager is reporting to MD, suppose, or I will say CEO of the organization. So all that manager do, CEO should be able to do and able to see. But all that CEO does, manager should not be able to see or should not be. Suppose this is the requirement. Then in this case, who can say my C1 will be manager or C1 will be CEO? Absolutely. So C1 level will be manager's level and C2 will be CEO level. Okay. Now you understood what is the requirement of inheritance. But still, I will go for C1 and C2 because this time we are talking about the syntactical analysis, not about any example. So this is C1 and this is C2. So this is the requirement of inheritance. Yeah. Oh, sorry. C2 colon C1. Yeah. All right. So now this is the fact why we need inheritance, what is inheritance, and how to do inheritance. That concept clear? Now let's go and implement it in a real-time manner in our Visual Studio. So let me save it. It's very easy. Okay. And small concept, not a very big concept. Small concept, easy concept, but important concept, useful concept. Almost always you will be using it. So let's go to Visual Studio. So let's plan something like let's say I have an organization where two variety of people are there. One is manager, one is accountant, suppose. And someone says when accountant is absent, manager should be able to do accountant's work, but when manager is absent, accountant should not be able to do manager's task. If that is the requirement, how we can do it? So name of the project I will give it as oops_inheritance. So here, as last class we have discussed, whatever additional classes we are going to create in this program, we have two ways. One is here itself, just like C1, C2, here we can do. Another way I have told, guys, who remembers, different file altogether, right? But the same namespace. So let's go for different file because slowly we are going towards using multiple classes. So why not additional classes we will plan in a different file. So I will right click the project name, click on add, click on class. Then it will ask what is the file name. File name I will give organization, but class name I will give manager and accountant. So organization, but the moment you create the file, it will automatically create a class with that name. Which name? Organization name, because name of the file is organization. So automatically it is thinking that perhaps your class name is organization, but we don't want that. We want my class name is, one is accountant, one is manager. So I will say accountant. So what is our requirement? If accountant is absent today, manager object should also fulfill accountant work. But if manager is absent today, accountant object should not be able to fulfill manager's task. That is the requirement. So here I will have two classes. One is accountant, one is manager. Makes sense? And as per our understanding and requirement, the skeletal structure should be like this. Don't you think so? Now inside class 1 and class 2, we have to think what accountant is using the data and functionality, what manager is using the data and functionality independently. Then we will think about whether creating the object of manager, can I use this function as well as this function also. So this time my data is suppose something like decimal, total income, decimal, I will say tax. Okay. Usually what I have suggested to initialize the data, guys, imagine I want to give some data to total income and tax. So if I will give here, then obviously all object will get that data. Maybe different objects should get different data. So what I have suggested to do, where exactly we should initialize the data? Constructor, absolutely. So constructor always suggested to be public. Don't you think so? Why? Because object is created always outside, and while creating the object only, constructor gets called. So public. What will be the name of the constructor always? Name of the class, that is also fine. So accountant, open bracket, close bracket, if it is a default constructor. If it is a parameterized constructor, then some parameter will be here. So but this time we are thinking about no complicacy, direct initialization, default constructor. So imagine 9999 and tax is something 10%. Okay, 10%. Now I have a functionality also here, something like display, should I say profit, total income minus tax equal to profit. So here instead of 10, why not I will say simply 99. Okay. So here I have another function. As I said, this time we are only thinking about public, not about private. Protected little later, after 5 minutes you will see. So public, no private, because private will not be accessible by same object also. Forget about other class object. So public void, I will say display profit. Okay, display profit. So how much profit? Total. Total income minus tax equal to profit. So console.writeLine, total profit is I will write total income minus tax. Very simple. Similarly, under manager, there is something. Whenever manager wants, he should get the idea about profit also, profit of the organization, and manager is taking one extra responsibility. Imagine that guy is a sales manager, okay, and he has some responsibility of keeping the track of quantity of sales. So quantity of sales is something like integer, total sales, okay, total quantity of sales. So I will say QTY sales, quantity of sales, and decimal price. Each item how much price and how many piece I have sold. All those information sales manager is maintaining. So constructor quantity of sales equal to say 20 pieces you have sold, and price is something like 100 rupees each. And here you have a functionality for manager which is saying display total amount or display amount. What is total amount? Quantity of sales multiplied by price. So console.writeLine total amount is quantity multiplied by price. So quantity of sales multiplied by price. Just for sake of any functionality, any data, I took this. That is not a big deal, what data or what functionality, but overall idea here is, can the object of sales use this functionality as well as this functionality? If I will not put this colon accountant, answer is no. If I will put this colon accountant, answer is yes. Because this become father, this become child. So child easily can say all the properties which my father has not declared as private is mine, he will say. Okay. In real case also, real life case also it is applicable. Suppose father is having 3 different property and he is saying first property is my private property, I am not going to give to any child, but second and third property is all ours. Then child easily can say, okay, whatever I have, but whatever my father has declared as shareable property to children, that is also mine. So this is something like that. So now let's go to main and create the object of child class and see whether child class functionality as well as parent class functionality we are able to call or not. So what is our child class here? Child class is manager, because our requirement is when accountant is absent, manager should be able to do that work. But when manager is absent, accountant should not do that work. If that is the requirement, then parent should be accountant, child should be sales manager. Whoever having maximum accessibility, he should be child always. Okay. So your father is having 1000 rupees, you are having 1000 rupees. If your father declared all that I have is my child's property as well, then you can easily say I have 2000, because your father's 1000 plus your 1000. But if you will ask to your father, he will say I have 1000 only, because all that my child has, not necessarily that is mine. So that is also applicable here. All that parent class has, that is of child also, but all that child is having, that is not of parent. But when I am saying all public, this time we are not talking about private. So let's go here and create the object of manager class. So sales manager, obj manager equal to new sales manager. Now if I will go for obj dot or obj manager dot, just have a look which are all functionalities we are able to call. Can you see display profit I am able to call, display total amount also I am able to call. I assume that today accountant is absent and manager is calling both the functionality. So obj manager dot display total profit also able to call, obj manager able to call display total amount also. Console.read key. Now let's put a breakpoint here and observe what is happening in which line. Debugging. So if I will press F11 in line number 9, where it should go? Class or constructor? Constructor. Obviously inside class, but it will directly go to constructor. So whenever object is created, constructor is getting called automatically. Remember that always. So I'm pressing F11. Where it came? its own class, own constructor. Okay, I'm further pressing F11. See where it came? It came to accountant class constructor. That means sequence of the execution will be line number 29, then line number 12. Remember, okay, easy concept, but one time clear understanding is required. Sequence of the execution is line number 29, then line number 12. That means if somebody asks what is the sequence of the execution of the constructors when you create the object in case of inheritance, what you have to say? You have to say first child class constructor, then parent class constructor. Writing that here. Interview question. Okay, what is sequence of execution of constructors in inheritance? Answer will be first child class, then parent class. Okay, but same thing somebody may ask it this way. What is sequence of data initialization of constructor in inheritance? Answer will be first parent class, then child class. See how? No doubt first it called to parent class, child class functional constructor, line number 29. But did it go to line number 31 and 32? No, not yet gone. From line number 29 itself, it jumped to line number 12. So execution is B then A, but the initialization will be A then B. Have a look, F10, F10, F10. Okay, so before initializing the value of 20 and 100, it has initialized total income and tax. Now F10 further. Have a look, now it came back to line number 29, then it went to line number 31 and 32. Okay, so initialization will be first parent, then child, but the execution will be first child, then parent. Okay, a common interview question people ask, and pick up 5 years experience, 10 guys. I will assure you 9 guys will not answer this correctly. Okay, so it should be execution bottom to top, but the initialization top to bottom. Now if I will press F11 here, line number 10, where it will go? It should go to obviously that function. Which function? Wherever it is, whether parent, whether child. So display profit, it will go. So F11, it is coming to parent. Why? Because a child class object can call both parent as well as child class function. So no doubt about it. So here it came and it says total income is this much and tax is this much. So minus this, whatever it will display. That means inside that object, if I will explain you through Excel sheet about the memory allocation, then now one object has been created in random access memory, but both class memory has been allocated to it. So if this is your random access memory and this is your object of creation, now my object name is obj manager. Now inside this 4 variables has been allocated and to function has been allocated. All 4 variables, both class functions. That's why this obj is able to use both of them. That is called parent to child relationship. So F10, F10, F10. Now it will come to display amount. So it will able to go to display amount of the child class. So even child class function is able to call, even parent class function is able to call. So sales manager, he is able to see total profit, which is accountant's responsibility, and his own responsibility is total amount, that also he is able to see. So wherever this kind of situation comes, that in a hierarchy, top level hierarchy, people wants to use somebody data or functionality of bottom level person, then just keep that who is to be used in the bottom, who is offering in the top, who is to be using the data or functionality, reusing, that is called reusing, because accountant is already using, but sales manager is now reusing that data. So inheritance in a single word, you can say reusability also. So should I write it here? The feature of reusability of one class members by other class, if any. Obviously, like we took one correct scenario here, if accountant is absent, please ask your manager to do that work. So manager is having one object, but still he is able to do both the person's work. But vice versa will not be correct. That also I mentioned there. Let me do that and see how much it is right, how much it is wrong. So suppose for a minute I will comment this. Okay, somebody says parent object can call the child function or not. Who is parent here? Accountant. Obj equal to new accountant. I will delete this, but still I am making a try. Obj dot, I am making a try. Have a look. Display profit is fine, but display total amount is not coming here. That means it is saying even if manager is absent, accountant should not be able to call that functionality which is being used by manager. So absolutely not possible. So child object can call parent function, but parent object cannot call child function. So still we are thinking about private and public. Okay, only public is associated with all these features. Private is always private. So if tomorrow I will come and make it private here, forget about manager's object, his own object also cannot call it. Have a look. Child class object is also saying I cannot call. Even parent class object also will say I cannot call. So accountant obj equal to new accountant. Now obj dot also if I will put, still we will not be able to call that function. That we already know in encapsulation itself. If it is a private, no chance. That's why we are not at all talking about private this time. We are only talking about public this time. But let's understand about protected also. So about public we understood. All the public property of parent will be reused by object of child. That is clear. Now think about protected member. What is additional feature of protected members? So I will give a heading here. So let me give a heading here. Know how about protected. What is special about protected in object-oriented programming? Only applicable in case of inheritance. That's why in encapsulation I didn't say about it. Protected, when we say, guys, quick definition is accessible to same class. Obviously, whatever you do, same class can access definitely. Accessible to same class as well as directly accessible to child class. That is for same class it behaves like public, but for child class, same class or child class, it behaves like public, but for all other classes, I mean to say who are not child, it behaves like private. Just read both the sentences and try to understand. Accessible in same class, not to mention whether you go for private, go for public, go for protected, go for internal, accessible to same class is always there. This point is important here. As well as directly accessible to child class. That means as of now another class was accessing always through object, isn't it? But your child class can access it directly. No need of object. No need of object. Let me write that here also. No need to create object in child class. I mean parent class object in child class. So no need to create parent class object in child class to access a protected member. That's why I say it can be directly accessed by child class, but all other classes not even directly, not even indirectly. So if it is a protected member, behaves like private for all other classes, but behaves like public for same class as well as your directly inherited classes. That means if I'll come to our example here, if I'll put something here, let's say I have something called string organization name. Okay, I have a string variable organization name, and organization name equal to, let's say, ABC Limited. Now what I want, this organization name should be directly used here also in Sales Manager. It is about variable. Similarly, you can think about the function also. So if I'll put here protected, sorry, spelling mistake. Acha, this one is protected, I mentioned. Who can say what is my total income and tax? Private or protected or public? Private, because by default they are private. Absolutely. That means total income I cannot use directly here. That is for sure. Somewhere here, if I want to say console.writeLine this, it will say what is this? Not accessible. Is inaccessible due to its protection level. It is saying your previous class has made it private, so you cannot use it. Now I want to use this one. Can you see? It is saying, yeah, mostly welcome. So protected member behaves like public or fully accessible inside the same class as well as in the child class. No restriction, nothing. You feel it as if both are in same family. Your brother's t-shirt sometimes you are using and going out, right? Same thing like that here. So it is both are in a single family, you think it that way, because this is father, this is child. But when you think about program class, is there anywhere written like inheritance to Sales Manager or so? Nothing. That means program is father or program is child or program is grandchild or grandfather or brother, sister, anything? Nothing, right? It is just like a neighbor class. That is what we mentioned here. So only for child class, we can say it is directly accessible, but for all other classes, this will behave like a private. So that means if I will go here in program class and I will try to use that variable, which variable? This variable, organization name, just like obj manager dot organization name, it will say no, not possible. I will copy paste also, it will say error. It will say there is some protection level, you cannot use it like this. Console dot write line this. Just take the mouse here and see what it is saying. Org name is inaccessible due to its protection level. Okay. Why so? Because behaves like private for outside classes, behaves like public for same class as well as child class. So I will just comment it here and say not possible because protected members are just like private for non-inherited classes. I will say this is a non-inherited class, means in other words just like a neighbor class, but for both of them, accountant as well as sales manager, this will behave like as if it is there only. Same thing applicable to function also, guys. If I'll make it protected, or let's go for another function also. So protected, this time I will ask you guys, okay, protected void and function name is display organization. Okay, so here I will say simply console.writeLine. Organization name is curly bracket 0 and org name. That means this function is only displaying the organization name, suppose. Now total there are 3 classes. Total there are 3 classes: accountant, sales manager and program. Now you help me. If I want to call this organization display function here in this function, that means inside the boundary of same class. Suppose here I want to call the function. How I will call in line number 22? Should I create object? Should not I create object? How I will call this function inside this function? Directly by the name, obviously, because they are in same class. Forget about inheritance, forget about encapsulation, forget about any feature. If it is same class, directly call it. Nobody is asking about anything because it's same class. Good. So directly can be called. Now come to this second class, sales manager. Here I want to call that function, suppose protected member. So how can I call? If you understood correctly, directly only, absolutely directly only, because our definition says all protected members are as if they are in child, they are in parent, both are in family. So anybody wants to call, let them call directly. Now come here. If I want to call that function here, which function? Organization function. So how can I call it? Should I create the object of there are 3 options for you. Should I create the object of accountant and call it? Should I create the object of sales manager and call it? Should I directly call it? Directly, yeah? Cannot be called directly. That is what our definition says, right? Because it's just like a neighbor class. They have no relation. So directly cannot be called. Absolutely fine. Very good. Then should I create the parent class object or even child class object can call it? Already we have an object obj manager, right? So if I will go for obj manager and put a dot, see what happens. So protected member can be called directly in the child class, no doubt about it. But protected member behaves like a private for outside of them. Outside of them means here it is outside only. Na? So here you just think like a private only. So if it would be private, your object cannot call it, right? Right? You cannot call it. So that means if you say here organization, obviously your child class cannot call it, because for outsiders it's like a private. Now try with parent class object itself. What is my parent class? Accountant. Obj accountant equal to new accountant. Who can say, should I be able to call or not? Should not. That is what our definition says. So have a look. If I will try to call forcefully also, it will say, hey, you cannot call. It is kind of private. Protected is kind of private for outside classes, but kind of public for same class or child class. That is what our definition says. So here what I will do, I will just comment it and will say not possible at any cost. So not possible, same thing I will write, because of protected is like private in outside classes. So my program class is outside class only, not even parent, not even child. It is just like neighbor. So same thing I will write here also. Is that clear now? Private and public, before itself you were got clarity. Now did you get clarity about protected? How it, so it is just like one intermediate accessibility between private and public. Private means no access at all. Public means fully access through object, of course. But protected means think where you are using it. If it is in the same class or in the child class, go ahead. No need even to create object. But if it is outside class, forget it. Not directly, not through object, not through parent class object, not through child class object, never. Because protected is just like private, to be treated for outsiders. Outsiders means outside classes, just like program class. Any question? So read this definition again and ask yourself how much you understood. This definition, we read it again. Accessible to same class as well as directly accessible to child class, definitely. Or I will say directly accessible to, at the beginning itself I will keep directly accessible to same class as well as child class. Point number 1. No need to create object. Okay. Second point is, for all other class, it will behave like private. So that is what I wrote. For same class or child class, it behaves just like public. However, for all other classes, it behaves like private. So none of the situation like direct call, call through parent object, or call through child object. None of situation is possible like direct call or call through object of parent or call through object of child, because it's just like private for outside classes. So in program class, none of this situation will be applicable, but in accountant and sales manager class, directly you can call without creating any object. So this is the thing you have to know about the protected. Okay. Currently, whatever we did, guys, this is called simple inheritance. One parent, one child. But there is one more category called hierarchical inheritance, where grandfather is present. Rules and regulations same only, but only it's a category. That means A to B, B to C. If this is accountant A, sales manager B, imagine you have some other called MD of the company or CEO of the company or senior manager. So that senior manager will be like C class. So C object can call all three class functionality. Sales manager means B object can call A and B functionality, and A class object can only call A class functionality. That is one extra understanding you have to have here. So category of inheritance. So second type category next class will implement, but let me tell you there are two categories. One is simple inheritance, that means only two generation, parent and child. Hierarchical inheritance means three or more generations. That means A class is inheriting to B. So A here, B here, who is inheriting to A. Now C here, who is inheriting to B. Okay, only coding is not there, only the symbolic representation I said A, B and C. So A to B, B to C. That means if you are creating object of C, so object of C can call all public members of A, B and C. But object of B can call only A and B public members. Thus theoretical understanding you have it now, but practical implementation of hierarchical inheritance we will do it in next class.